termination is hard. Did you want me to say anything more?
I think you ought to, because I'm a little struck with silence.
Mm-hmm. You are struck with silence because of termination?
Yeah. I mean, I've always seen myself as a termination like expert. I remember when Lee was telling us, Nat Kuhn, Stuart Andrews, that she was moving to Norway, and how able I was to help her and them process their feelings around her departure.
Yeah.
And then of course, I spent a lot of my life moving from place to place and have always been accustomed to saying goodbye.
Yeah.
So I'm rather surprised that today, instead of being forthcoming and talkative, that I'm noticing some anxiety inside of me, and then a little bit of silence.
Yeah.
So
What do you think that is about from an APT perspective?
well, it really lets you know that I'm anxious talking about this topic with you.
Yeah.
And I know that we are coming close to our last weekend in core training, where our group has never met in person
This whole
due to
year.
COVID.
Yeah.
Yeah, for the whole year.
Yeah.
And in fact, we'll be graduating students who we have been able to meet in person with for a year and a half.
Yeah.
But a year and a half of their training, well, or a year of their training has been online.
Yeah.
So the termination feels very different because
Yeah.
we'll be ending together via Zoom
Yeah.
than ending in person.
Yeah. So you think that that's harder? Because sometimes you could think that maybe like Zoom would help you to have a bit of, to be a bit disconnected.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know if it's harder, but maybe the roadmap is missing.
Yeah.
Because between the two of us, we've had several core graduations together,
Yeah.
and we have tradition in
Yeah.
terms of how we do that. We have
Yeah.
like a goodbye dinner, and we hand out certificates,
Yeah.
and we acknowledge every person in the group and what their strengths are and what they're working on. And we have these rituals in Stockholm where we say goodbye,
Yeah.
right, over and over and over again during our last weekend together.
Yeah. The
I mean,
last lunch, the last dinner, the party,
the party, the music,
yeah, the
yeah,
bumblebees.
the bumblebees. And I mean, I also think, I hope I'm not making this up, but remember the place heaven?
Yeah.
That I do believe that we always end up in heaven,
Yeah.
and have, a glass of sparkling wine to just acknowledge the work from the year, and to celebrate and to feel proud and excited and happy,
Yeah.
and to just be together before we end
Yeah.
the year.
So those traditions helps us to both grieve and feel relief.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and because they're traditions, meaning we do them over and over and over again, it's something that we can like expect.
Yeah.
And it allows us to have a structure to feel comfortable in.
Yeah. And that
And
allows us to feel.
Yeah, absolutely. To feel in a supported way, to
Yeah,
feel with one another, because our
yeah,
team is like together when we're in Stockholm.
yeah,
And while we have things that we do as a whole group, we also have things that we do as smaller groups of the whole.
yeah,
And so there's old traditions and new traditions, like the bumblebee,
yeah,
like, having each graduate receive the knitted bumblebee.
yeah.
So we'll be people will be receiving virtual diplomas, virtual bumblebees.
Yeah. And actually, it's interesting when we're talking about it because last year was also online due to COVID. So
Mhm.
we are starting to have a tradition on Zoom as well.
Right.
I wonder what that will help us with.
Yeah, and as you say that, I wonder, did we do anything last year when we were online that would be important for us to do this year? Do you remember what we did?
Yeah, I think so. I remembered I remember that we were like graduating each person and you spoke to every person and the group spoke to every person and then they got the certificate and the bumblebee but
Right.
virtually.
Right, right. So yeah, so we'll have to plan on doing that on Sunday, the last day
Yeah,
of core. And so I guess we have our first online tradition.
yeah, I would guess
Yeah,
that.
right, right. And we also know that when COVID is over and we can all travel again,
Yeah,
that last year's class and this year's class will be able to come together for our first weekend of training in Stockholm.
yeah, and we will have
And we will have a party. Absolutely. I'm having images of the gala in Amsterdam for the 2016 IEDTA conference
yeah,
when when we were at the train station
yeah,
with the band and good food and
yeah,
everyone dressed up. So we'll have to plan something really special
yeah,
like that in
yeah,
Stockholm.
yeah. So if we connect that like termination in therapy and termination in core training, what's the most important part you think when we are terminating, like ingredients of termination?
I think structure is really important,
Yeah,
like knowing what your structure for termination is and communicating that to your client,
yeah,
letting them know what to expect in the termination process.
yeah,
And I remember when I was a student, I was taught like the steps of termination.
yeah,
As a clinician, I learned that each termination, while you have a structure to guide you, is different.
yeah,
That no terminations are the same. It's really dependent on the people who are involved and what's important to them.
yeah,
So some people really need like a lengthy termination process.
yeah,
They might even have to identify in December
yeah,
that they would like their last session to be in June,
yeah,
right? And that they really need to be processing the termination throughout the months
yeah,
and really working on saying goodbye.
yeah,
Other people need no notice. They will tell you it's fine to terminate next week,
yeah,
right? And and so you learn over time to like collaborate with your clients, and that's very much the APT way, to
yeah,
talk about termination and to find out like what termination means to them.
yeah,
What does it mean to say goodbye to you?
yeah,
Why are they saying goodbye? And like how do they want to say goodbye?
yeah. And I would guess that it's important also to um, reflect on it as a therapist, the connection to like the core conflict, for example. So how they react on the termination could also be part of that, or is it really like reflected in a good termination? But I think that's what I tell to my students as well. You can have all the different terminations, but always reflect on what's happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you are reflecting on what's happening, it's important that you still maintain your role as a clinician,
Yeah,
because you really want to be noticing, just as you did with me at the beginning of this conversation, how anxious is your client, right?
yeah,
Are they becoming defended? You know, are they able to regulate their anxiety and to be connected with you?
yeah,
And also be aware of like what saying goodbye means to them, what has happened in the past,
yeah,
right, that informs them on how to say goodbye, and have they had healthy goodbyes in the past,
yeah,
or or have they had traumatic goodbyes in the past.
yeah,
So you're still working with the triangle of conflict and the triangle of person
yeah.
as you're in the termination process. That doesn't change. It doesn't go away.
No,
And I think what's really important is that even if a date is identified as this is going to be the last session, you still have to be comfortable with the ambivalence associated with perhaps the last session being messy,
yeah,
right? Not necessarily being pleasant,
no,
or revealing that there's more work to be done,
yeah,
right? Or in some cases, like it was too short, too clinical, didn't have enough soul,
yeah,
right? It's like whatever happens in that last session, you have to really accept
yeah,
a- as meant to
exactly.
be.
Yeah, and that it's a real that it's a reaction on termination, that the patient, for example, wants to do things to keep you, but that this is a reaction that you have to like hold.
Right. And I think that's really important, Jenny. And it reminds me that you have such a healthy attachment perspective, right? Like you're really able to see that in most cases, your patient doesn't want to let go, doesn't want to say goodbye,
Exactly.
right? Because the two of you have done a lot of good work together,
Yeah,
right? And you have a bond.
yeah,
And what I find so helpful in APT is our emphasis on the people outside of the session, on,
exactly.
on the team that our clients build for themselves, so that when they do say goodbye to us, we know that they're going to their home team,
Yeah,
where they have like friends and colleagues and other healthcare professionals
yeah,
to support them and to
exactly.
be with them.
Yeah, and that's really important. And sometimes one other reaction could be like, a new therapist or something that is more a reaction, and then it's very important to like remind of the healthy people and the healthy team that's already surrounded the patient in termination.
Yeah, if your patient is working with others, you've done a great job.
Yeah,
And I know that I've made referrals to people to do EMDR with another therapist,
yeah,
and ultimately the success of that treatment led to an earlier termination with me.
yeah,
And those are the moments for you as a therapist to feel proud. If
yeah,
if somebody, leaves the work that they've done with you, and they have a team of people that are there to support them in a loving way,
yeah,
then you ought to, and your patient ought to feel really proud of how well things have gone.
Yeah.
And
And
I
that's
know
the good side of it, but it's also like you have to be aware that it could be like a reaction of the termination, and then it's important to just like see it and mirror it sometimes, that maybe a search for a new therapist isn't necessary. But that's
Well, I
another
think
way.
that's why, yeah, I think that's why we're always so focused on communicating with our patients new learning,
Yeah,
letting them know how they've changed, not on the day of termination, every single session.
yeah,
And so you have to, create a weekly practice if you're seeing someone weekly, where you are pointing out the new learning that you see in them
yeah,
over and over and over again.
yeah,
Because it's not like you want to wait for the termination day to celebrate how someone's changed. You need to be giving them that positive reinforcement, every time you meet with them.
yeah. That's very important.
Yeah.
But another part of termination is, and this is what I will speak to the students in core training about, is how do they think that their own experience of termination and separation affects their therapeutic endings with their patients? Because that's another part of it. The therapist is saying goodbye to a work and the relationship, sometimes really important and very much with their own affect phobias, for example. So it's of course different, but sometimes it's really activating their own separations.
Yeah, it's really important for therapists to explore the terminations they've experienced in their lifetime, and to be aware of how those terminations impacted them.
Yeah,
Uh, the more aware you are as a therapist about the truth of separations or terminations in your life, like what's made them hard, what's made them too easy at
yeah,
times, right? It is important information to have, so that when you are working with someone in the termination process, you're aware of what's happening inside of you, and
yeah,
why. It's
yeah.
not like you want to be surprised by it
No,
as you're doing
right
termination,
there. No,
right?
or just run by it.
Right, like very quickly. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Which I have to say, most therapists enjoy running by it as quickly as possible in
yeah.
my experience. They
Could
just
be.
wanna wrap it up, right? Like, yeah.
Do you think that that is like the affect phobia for closeness that therapists tend to have? Because then you have to like in termination you have to work with that closeness in different ways. Maybe to hear that you've been a good therapist for the patient, but also to hear things that they were not so happy with, or what
It's
do you think?
very hard. I have a termination coming up in 2 weeks, where I had both good results and negative reviews.
Hmm.
And and I'm already thinking about that meeting,
Yeah,
preparing myself for the process,
yeah,
and making sure that before I go into it, I do have an understanding of like the structure, like what
yeah,
are questions that I want to be asking.
yeah,
So I'll make a list of questions such as, how has treatment affected a person? How have they grown?
yeah,
Uh, what how do they wish to grow further?
yeah,
There's a lot of different questions that I will think about specific to a person,
yeah,
to help them begin to really explore what the process of treatment was like for them,
yeah,
and how it impacted them,
yeah,
and what do they wish to do moving forward.
yeah,
And I think like focusing in on the idea of growth
Yeah,
is really important. This idea that we grow together.
yeah,
Right. And
exactly.
yeah, and I also do think change is important because of course people come to psychotherapy to experience change. They want to
Yeah,
change patterns in their life.
yeah, exactly. Actually, I have this quote from Volkan and Sintel that's called "Loss is a brutal gift." And that's what termination is. And also, like, therapy is a brutal gift
Right.
sometimes.
Right. So it says loss is
Loss
a
is a brutal gift.
yeah, yeah.
And it's like we grow with the loss and the termination and the grief
Mm-hmm.
and the
Mm-hmm.
ending.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, do you want to say a little bit more about that, Jenny?
No, it's more like the termination part is reminding people, of course, with the ultimate separation that is death.
Mm-hmm.
So of course, it's every separation reminds us of that in of course different ways as
Mm-hmm.
humans.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think we in determination get in contact with grief,
Mm-hmm.
and we have to mourn what we will miss, of
Mm-hmm.
course, and
Mm-hmm.
both feel that grief and sadness, but also that the positive parts of it. But we have to be in both of it. And I think if we do that work together, we will grow. But it's
Mm-hmm.
sometimes brutal feelings.
Right. Right. Really painful feelings.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, when I think about our group ending in this year of COVID, I mean, we're experiencing the loss of not being with one another
Yeah.
in real time.
Yeah.
The brutal reality
Yeah.
that for a year we've been separated from one another in our offices, in our homes,
Yeah.
and we have come together the best that we could,
Yeah.
but we certainly long to be in one another's presence.
Yeah. And there's also the brutal fact that COVID is so connected to death
Yeah,
and
yeah,
separation.
yeah,
So it's been a long year with grief and anger, of course,
right,
and missing each
right.
other.
And everyone's been in survival mode.
Yeah.
So the repercussions of this year we're, we haven't quite seen yet.
No.
It'll be like when the crises pass that the griefs will arrive
Yeah.
and the sorrows.
Yeah.
So
True.
it's like we know there's grief around us,
Yeah.
but we don't necessarily feel it as much
No.
as we will.
No. That's true.
Hmm.
So that means that when we get in contact with grief, we can discover what's valuable.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it takes, maybe that's the hard part of ending core online, that it's
Hmm.
in a way we get in contact maybe later. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
it will, it's harder in that way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to know because of course we receive an experience that's different than what we would have had.
Yeah.
And there are hidden gifts.
Yeah,
Like for instance, uh, working online and home, right? Suddenly you have the comforts of home
yeah.
as you're working online. And for many of us, we never imagined that ever happening.
No.
No.
And also the time to take care of yourself is more. You don't have to travel. You don't have to fly. People don't have to go on trains or flights from different parts of the world,
Right.
and still can join and have more time for themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. And I remember when COVID first started, I was so excited to not fly.
Yeah.
And
And now you're excited to fly.
I am, and I'm excited to fly and arrive
Yeah,
and to spend more time with friends and colleagues and family and to savor the moments
yeah,
in ways that I didn't.
yeah.
So Jenny, I'm wondering, like when you are teaching your therapist about termination, what are things that you ask them to keep in mind?
There's a lot of things I ask them to keep in mind. But the structure is one part, and it can be different, but it's important to like have a structure, just as you said, and also to not run by it, to stay with the client, and of course have some sessions to end. It's not like, if you have the time, at least 3 sessions to just work on ending.
Mhm.
And to explore in an APT perspective, to really explore the feelings towards the therapist, and the
Mhm.
feelings connected to ending, and like really face both the closeness and the gratefulness that's hard to
Mhm.
receive, especially as a new therapist, but also to ask for things that could have been different, or that maybe the patient really needs like an excuse, that the therapist actually say, I'm sorry if that felt hard for you.
Mhm.
But a really important thing from an APT perspective is also to I think Lee is like writing something like pinpointing reasons for change,
Mhm.
so that the patient can really like integrate the change and the important work that the patient has done, because that's a really important part in the future as well, to not fall back into patterns, for example.
Right. Right.
So, and that's a motivating factor to stay in that change.
And I really rely on the 10 session form when I'm working at my best,
Yeah,
meaning, filling out that form on a weekly basis and then sharing it with my patients so that, both of us are in agreement as to what problems need to be resolved,
yeah,
what core conflicts are connected to those problems, and then
yeah,
what's happening session to session. And and then also being really open to uh paying attention to when symptoms disappear
yeah,
and health is more apparent. So if someone's diagnosed with like an anxiety disorder in session 1, does it still exist in session 5?
yeah,
Yeah, and is it gone by session 10? And I think it's really important that we expect results.
yeah,
I mean, we're there in order to decrease suffering, and
yeah,
the process might be painful
yeah,
and might be full of suffering, but ultimately our goal is for our patients to let go of defenses that are no longer working for them, and to be in a more connected place where they have access to all their emotions
Yeah.
inside themselves and with other people.
Yeah. That's good.
So go ahead. Yeah.
No, it's just that that important part of pinpointing reasons for change and where the change was, and how, and to follow that, it's really interesting to think about that as core students as well.
Mhm.
Like, what happened to me as a therapist during core training? Do I have, like, can I pinpoint change, and when? For example, I had a really strong changing point when I had a role play,
Mhm.
when I got to meet myself and really see myself as a good therapist and be able to see that and to receive that from one of my uh, co-students. And that was a starting point for me in terms of self-care. So I think it's really important as a therapist as well, during their therapist training, or in this case core training, to look at themselves and their own change.
Absolutely. And I'm really glad that you mentioned that, because particularly like when you're working with someone, it's important to recognize the change that has happened with that person.
Yeah,
Like we are as touched by the people that we work with as they are touched by us,
yeah,
and we change one another.
yeah,
And so, a therapist ought to expect that when they meet with someone on session 1, and let's say they end by session 10, that something has also happened within themselves as it has with the patient. And it's important to like acknowledge
yeah,
what those gifts are,
yeah,
right? It's we're always touched by the people who come into our offices and honor us with the opportunity to work with them.
yeah,
And I know, moving forward in APT, as we're training like psychotherapists,
yeah,
and we're beginning to see that there's a lot of coaches in the world that are appreciating like what affect phobia therapy can do for them in their practice.
yeah,
But we also have to hold in mind how it's touched all the people that we worked with, all of our previous clients and patients.
yeah,
And so you get to kind of look at both the providers and the receivers
yeah,
and see like how have they all changed?
yeah,
Who are they now?
yeah.
So I'm glad you
Exactly.
brought that up. Yeah,
And I think that's a really important part of that termination process and
for
grief.
sure, for sure. Yeah, and I remember Lee McCullough was always very good at helping us as her students identify what emotional blocks we were still holding on to, and in helping us release them
Yeah,
so that we could be more comfortable working with our patients.
yeah,
And so it's always important to keep that in mind.
yeah.
But I'm watching Stockholm become darker.
Yes,
What time is it over there right now?
it's 9:10.
Wow. Wow. Well, out here in San Diego, it's lunchtime. So
I'm happy for you.
yeah, I have a day of going to the beach and maybe a yoga class, and getting some work done to prepare for our weekend.
Yeah.
So, and anything else you want to say before we wrap up on termination?
No, no, just to the students to reflect on their own process, and
Sure.
and to prepare for termination in that way.
Yep. Well, thank you, Jenny, for joining me today
Thank you
and
for
helping what
having me.
was a hard topic become
Yeah.
easier to discuss.
Thank
All right.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.